everyone. I am Oita Coleman, Senior Advisor at the Open Voice Network and moderator of today's webinar on data security specific to voice technology. Before we begin our session, we will need to take care of some housekeeping, and that is the reading of the Linux Foundation antitrust policy, which states that Linux Foundation meetings involve participation by industry competitors, and it is the intention of the Linux Foundation to conduct all of its activities in accordance with applicable antitrust and competition laws. It is therefore extremely important that attendees adhere to meeting agendas and be aware of and not participate in any activities that are prohibited under applicable U.S. state, federal, or foreign antitrust and competition laws. Examples of types of action that are prohibited at Linux Foundation meetings and in connection with Linux Foundation activities are described in the Linux Foundation antitrust policy available at the link on your screen. If you have questions about these matters, please contact your company counsel, or if you're a member of the Linux Foundation, feel free to contact Andrew Updegrove of the firm of Gesmer Updegrove LLP, which provides legal counsel to the Linux Foundation. Again, thank you for joining us today. I am Oita Coleman, Senior Advisor at the Open Voice Network, an open source community of the Linux Foundation. In my role, I am responsible for the development of the Open Voice Network's privacy, security, and ethical use portfolio. We are advancing the research and development of voice-specific guidance for both the protection of individual and commercial user data privacy for security for consumer-facing enterprises worldwide. So let's establish the premise for today's webinar and provide context for Open Voice Network's recent publication, Data Security Specific to Voice, an executive white paper. Specifically, voice technology brings with it several unique risks and new threat surfaces that require attention. Existing global security frameworks cover some aspects of data security, but voice-specific regulations and legislation are lacking. We will highlight areas of potential security weaknesses, and we will assert the need for security standards to protect enterprise and consumer voice data to earn user trust. And ultimately, we believe that the protection of individual and organizational data will lead to broader adoption of voice technology. To achieve today's goal, joining me are panelists, Dr. Birgit Popp and Ed Sewell. Dr. Birgit Popp is a multidisciplinary researcher currently serving as group manager, team leader, user experience, and senior scientist for privacy and speech technology at the Fraunhofer Institute. Birgit leads a team on human machine and is an expert on privacy and conversational AI. She has been awarded with several research and career awards, including grants by the Wellcome Trust, Fraunhofer, and the Frederick Ebert Foundation. Welcome, Birgit.
Thank you, Oita. It's a pleasure.
Ed Sewell is an AI technology pioneer. He is the founder of Velocity AI, a global artificial intelligence network services company and data marketplace. Velocity AI's vision is to build trust in AI to accelerate economic growth for everyone. He is also the founder and chief architect of Virtual DNA, a global cyber AI security innovation firm. A thought leader in sustainable growth market development and investments, Ed also serves as a strategic advisor at the Linux Foundation. Welcome, Ed.
Thank you very much for that introduction, Oita. It's great to be here with you and Birgit.
So thank you for providing your expertise in today's webinar. So to those of you who are joining us, we will spend the next 20 to 25 minutes in discussion with our experts. As questions come to your mind as you listen to our discussion, we welcome you to use the chat to ask questions, which we will address later in the session. So to begin, let's establish the why of our conversation. There are many global security frameworks. There's the International Telecommunications Union, the Open Web Application Security Project, or OWASP. There's ISO 27000 series, there's NIST, GDPR, and many more. So, Birgit, you and your colleagues at Fraunhofer Institute have provided invaluable input related to voice privacy and security. As it relates to security, specifically NIST asserts a security triad of confidentiality, integrity, and availability, CIA. How do these three security principles apply to voice data, and in what ways are they lacking?
So when you look at these three principles, there is a part of them that is well established and generally applicable to data, and that still should be applied to voice data. And then there are some voice-specific questions that come up that are not solved yet. So let's go through each one of them. With confidentiality, in general, what you are looking at is matters of authentication, like a secure place of storage, encryption, and separation of data. And all of these things, like you should think about also for voice. Uniquely for voice, one matter correlated with confidentiality and specifically authentication is authentication with voice. So your voice is can be used as a unique marker for you to allow you to identify yourself when you are interacting with a voice-activated system. So imagine you're at a door of your company, and you're facing a voice assistant, and they are asking your name, and you're actually answering with your name, and the system would be able to identify you as Oita and say, "Oh yeah, hi Oita, you're allowed to enter," and this would be in contrast to using, let's say, a password or a token to get in. But there are also issues with authentication with voice. For example, the GDPR says that you have to allow users to choose whether they want their voice ID to be saved, because it's their personal data. They need to be able to say, I want to have that. I want to keep that to myself. I don't want it to be saved on a system somewhere by my employer, and them being able to identify whether I'm in a room speaking with colleagues or not, or whether I want to use that as like a nice feature to get into the building more easily. And this is a question that is like debated, and different legislative bodies have different opinions on that. Then another, but we're in the realm of confidentiality, right? Another aspect specific to voice on confidentiality is something that is called spoofing attacks, which is really interesting. So it's possible to change a voice signal in such a way that it sounds perfectly inconspicuous for the human ear. Let's say a voice signal, like just me saying hello Oita or hello Ed, how are you? But in the essentially in the background of the voice signal, not audible for the human ear, you can have a malicious attack hidden in that voice signal. So for example, it could say open all doors, and in an Internet of Things where voice control like if you have voice controlled devices or even voice control houses, this could be bad to, like, you can easily imagine something like that being dangerous. With integrity, like going to the next point of the CIA triage, with integrity, in general, what you want with your data is that they are intact, they are not corrupted, and they are correct. Like you put in data, you put in, for example, a street name, just like in a general sense, like by typing, and you want that to be correct so that when you deliver to your customer, you have the correct address. When it comes to speech, you have some unique problems coming up with that, because for once, speech technology is not perfect. So there are frequent errors that can happen when you are taking a speech signal and, for example, transcribing it to text. Let's say I'm talking with an assistant that should allow me to have my my food delivered to my home address, and I'm telling them my home address, but then it's like maybe I have a funny accent, or just the system is not perfect and it does not understand me perfectly, and then it's not delivered to the right address. So there are a lot of potential issues there, and it's also not clear how to deal with that. How can you correct these issues? Then moving on to availability. In general, you want your data to be available, and there are a number of issues that can happen, like denial of service attacks, hardware failures, unscheduled software downtime, and network bandwidth issues. Also, when you're dealing with voice, you want to keep those in mind. But in addition to that, specifically with voice, it is useful to have in mind when designing your system that these inferences from voice that we just talked about in the example with delivery, they are, you should assume that there are errors in there, and you should design your system in such a way that these errors can be recovered. So it should be part of the design of how you design your voice technology.
All right, thank you for that basic overview of talking about the limitations or within that the triad of confidentiality, integrity, availability, and how it relates to voice. So you highlighted a couple of limitations. But what's the implication of not implementing voice-specific data security standards? So if you could touch on that. So what's the implications of not implementing voice-specific data security standards?
Yeah, I'd like to answer these questions from two perspectives. One is the user's perspective, and the other one is a business perspective. So the main point from the user perspective is trust. If security is not addressed by the developer or the company that offers voice technology, then trust will become an issue for users, because users will want to know what data are collected, what happens with my data, am I in control, and how can I even control what happens with my data? And they also will want to know even what is in my best interest when it comes to voice and speech technology, as it's an emerging field. And they probably will want to be supported by the company and led by the company, so that they know, okay, the company is already setting defaults that are in my best interest. From a company's perspective, it's actually sustainable growth, which is the main factor that is endangered if you do not address security in your voice technology. As I pointed out before, the voice technology inherently is not perfect, and security, actually a big part of security, is making sure that your data are intact, and that like any inferences from the data are intact, so that you can rely on your data. And if you're not doing that, that means that the quality of your data is poor. And usually with voice technology, what you're doing is you have essentially your business model is based on the quality of your data and also the quantity of your data. And if you have poor quality data, then it's essentially garbage in, garbage out. You're not going to produce a very reliable and high functioning technology. And that is in the interest of a business. Yes, and also another point, which is also important for businesses, is how easy is it for malicious actors to get access to the data that I'm basing my business model on. So that is another aspect of security.
So, Ed, you and your team at Velocity, you provided strategic guidance and served as a primary authors of the voice security white paper. And one of the things that you pointed out in particular is that with the future of voice interoperability, what are the new voice data security threats that are introduced by system to system or agent to agent interoperability? Birgit gave us some general examples, but this new interoperability offers some new threats. Could you talk us through what those are?
Yes, absolutely. We'll talk about them primarily as three specific risks that expand the existing threat surface. So I'll step back just for a second to add context to that question. And so when Birgit talked about voice data and how rich that data set is, it's only second to DNA. So when we think about that from a value proposition from the consumer's perspective, and also from the business perspective to gather insights from the data, only DNA has a richer data set. So what that means is the data from a biometrics perspective, we can analyze the data, know what your emotions are. We can understand what your fears are. We can understand pre-existing conditions like Parkinson's. There's many different data points that can be analyzed that's personalized to an individual, that when we go shopping and use our voice as our identity to either purchase something online or access our bank account, we don't want our banks or our retailers to know that additional information that's personal to us. So that's the true value proposition behind the richness of the data set itself. So when we talk about the data and why it's so important to protect it, the second point is you only need a small sample size in order to infer and breach security as well as privacy. We outline in the paper that you only need a few seconds of someone's voice saying certain phrases, and then you have enough that you can, going back to Birgit's point, as far as spoofing is concerned, be able to use that to create what's called deep fakes. So deep fakes is one risk that we talked about, the fraudulent use of synthetic voice data to fake voice identity and authentication systems. The second is eavesdropping. So we talked a little earlier about the audio component in data, voice data specifically. So there's an audio component that now allows companies access to data from background noise, such as your speaker. So for example, if you're talking on Zoom or you're working from home, there's background information that can infer certain things about you that you want to keep private and you want to keep secure. In addition to that, Birgit also talked about inaudible sounds with spoofing. So for example, a dog whistle, a dog can hear that sound, a human can't. So what's the impact of eavesdropping? Now our conversations are no longer private, and bad actors can also record those conversations to find certain cues to access and bypass voice identification and authentication systems. For example, those inaudible signals can be used to access my phone. Now my phone can access my car. Now my phone can access my office building or my home based on those inaudible signals that can't be heard by humans, but AI can hear it very clearly and knows how to act. The third risk that we talked about is the risk of AI against AI, which is termed as adversarial attacks. So just again, to give some context around adversarial attacks, deep learning algorithms were developed and became more robust by having two AIs compete against one another. And based on the mistakes that they made and the vulnerabilities that they unlocked and the examples, they become smarter. Now, those same algorithms have been modified to create what's called adversarial AI attacks using these inaudible signals and other types of technology, text-based technology, again, to bypass identification, authentication, but also as it relates to the risk to the enterprise, data sets as far as the language models that are used to infer certain decisions and have a conversation with an individual. Now those are being modified by adversarial AI's inputs that aren't recognizable by humans. It changes the model and now it changes the output. And so that becomes an inherent risk within an enterprise.
So with those three new threat surfaces that you just highlighted, the deep spoofing or deep fakes, authentication, and adversarial data attacks, you asserted in the white paper, you asserted the need for two new security standards. Can you describe what those standards are?
Yes, so what we asserted was the need for voice identification and multi-agent data sharing. So I'll start with voice identification. So it's identification that one, this is a human being speaking, and two, that it's a human being and not an avatar. Because when we think about the metaverse and virtual worlds and immersive experiences, now we have another threat actor involved. Again, we talked about AI itself and deep learning that creates avatars and deep fakes that may be recognizable by the human ear, that we know that that's not my voice, that's not my parents' voice, that's not my spouse's voice, but to another AI agent, it sounds like your voice. So that's allows with the spoofing. So what we asserted, again, was voice identification to verify that it's a human being, not a machine, an intelligent machine, an avatar. And also the second one is secure multi-agent data sharing. So when we think about a world of interoperability, we have a number of different agents. We have within the ecosystem of Apple, Siri, we have Alexa, we have Cortana, but then we think about a bigger world where we have payment agents and we have open wallet agents and healthcare agents. And so in this world, how do these agents connect and communicate with one another? And how do they, more importantly, how do they do it securely? And so that's why we asserted the need for secure multi-agent data sharing. And so, for example, we talked a little bit earlier about smart homes and smart cities and why that's so important. So when you think about the interconnectivity within a city, within a community, within your home, if your voice is the primary interface into this physical as well as this immersive and virtual world, there's inherent risks there that need to be addressed.
Very good. So with those two standards that are proposed and they are documented in the white paper, we're expecting to publish an update to the paper by the end of October. So after that, so what's next? We propose the standards. What's next? What's necessary to make the guidelines and recommendations actionable?
So what's next in the next white paper iteration will drill down more specifically and detailed around voice authentication, why that's so important, and how do we integrate voice authentication with a standard called FIDO, which stands for Fast Identity Online. It's a universal standard for authentication. So how do we integrate a voice ID with an established global standard called FIDO? So for example, now with voice ID will become similar to a fingerprint ID that you see on consumer smartphones. So now you can use your voice to access your phone and other services. Once this passkey is connected or integrated. So that's the primary focus of the next iteration of the paper. Now, more specifically, how do we make this more actionable? The next phase now beyond the white paper is a security reference implementation based on the Velocity AI data security reference architecture. And so the word that I want to use is acceleration. So now we move from years to develop standards, we start making progress in months so that we can test out these new voice authentication processes through multiple use cases. And then the third step is the certification process to ensure that we adhere to not only the Open Voice Network and Linux Foundation standards, but as well as other certification bodies internationally.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Birgit, added for this great discussion. I know really we could spend the next hour just continuing to discuss this very important topic, but we just wanted to introduce the topic, introduce the white paper, and now we want to open it up to there's a couple of questions that have been posted in Q&A and in chat. Nathan, you were going to read the questions for us.
We have a couple of questions, Oita. One is from Clifton Montgomery. He asks, what frameworks best address the vulnerabilities in voice technology?
I can answer that. That'll also be in the next iteration of the white paper, but it's a zero trust security model where we trust but verify. And that goes back to re-emphasizing the need for voice identity standards.
Very good.
And we have another question from John Stein, chair of the Open Voice Network. He asks, Birgit at Oita, what is your #1 security concern for voice?
So for me,
Yes. You want to address that one, Birgit?
For me, it's voice cloning. Voice cloning is my #1 concern because it essentially allows you, as described, as Ed said, with very little data to clone your voice to a degree that it sounds very much like you, and you can make that artificial voice say anything you like. That's potentially dangerous.
Ed and Oita, would you like to comment on that as well?
I'll defer to you, Oita.
No, I think that would be my answer as well, but there is also a concern that we haven't really touched on, and that is the protection of vulnerable populations, especially children, you know, in terms of protecting their identity, protecting the usage of it. And that's why it's so important that when we talk about authentication, that is not just, is this a real person, but is this someone who's a young person, you know, and protecting, making sure that the existing laws that are on the books to protect minors, that they are respected. And so that's one area that that concerns me greatly.
And we have another question here. It's actually a two-part question from Chris Parker. He says, excellent insights. Thank you very much for the well-structured discussion. For a normal human user, how would you recommend that we, one, maintain more security and privacy? Is there a last pass for voice yet? And then he goes on to comment that he and his team are actively deploying conversational AI at scale and store massive amounts of call and conversation recording. He asks where to start with considering how to bring these insights into our privacy and security positioning. Thanks, Chris.
And do you, what?
Yes, well, the first with that is kudos. Thank you for actually incorporating and looking at security first as you develop your conversational AI platforms and applications. So what we would recommend is that early in the process, if you haven't done so already, get your Chief Information Security Office involved in these conversations, share the white paper with them, and then you can reach out to representatives of the Open Voice Network. We talked about next steps. Next steps is engaging individuals and organizations like yourself to help walk you through what are the risks, and then take a look at your enterprise use cases and how we can integrate security to help protect your data.
Very good. And we thank Chris for that question, and would love to learn more about your implementation and see how we can learn from you and the work that you're doing. And so with that, we are at time, and I'd like to thank you for attending today's webinar. We welcome your review and feedback of the data security white paper. And if you have any feedback or input, feel free to reach out to me. And so I'd like to take this opportunity to thank Birgit and Ed. We value you and your expertise. And we really appreciate you sharing your wisdom and guidance with us today. And I am sure that there will be an additional webinar that follows this, because we really just touched the surface of the discussion. So with that, until next time, I'm Oita Coleman, Senior Advisor at the Open Voice Network. And we thank you for your time today.
Thank you
so much, Louisa.